Oh, they thought they were untouchable, didn't they? Thought they held all the cards, played all the strings, and controlled the game. They looked at you with smug arrogance, believing their power, their influence, their money, their fame, gave them a status beyond any reckoning, a stature that made them untouchable, a force so mighty no one dared defy them. They were wrong. They believed themselves to be above it all, to be standing on the summit of existence, with all the pieces neatly aligned under their feet. And yet, the very ground beneath them was already eroding, the foundation crumbling under the weight of their delusion. There is a certain kind of blindness that comes with success, a kind of blindness that wraps itself in the plush velvet of control and dominance. They thought they could shape the world in their image, bend every person to their will, make every obstacle vanish like smoke in the air. But you cannot command the universe like a servant. It does not bend to the whims of arrogant men and women who believe their grip is eternal. No matter how much they had, no matter how many people they manipulated or intimidated, they had nothing. Nothing that truly mattered. Because at the end of it all, they were nothing but fleeting echoes in the wind, a faint shadow of a world that would move on without them, a world that would laugh at their pitiful attempts to claim something they never truly understood. They thought they had won. They thought their triumphs, their victories, and their riches defined their place in the world, gave them control over life and death, over success and failure, over the fate of every soul who crossed their path. They thought the game was theirs to win, and they had it all figured out. But in the quiet, they missed something. They missed the quiet hum of destiny, whispering through the cracks, the subtle reminder that no one is ever truly in control, that no one is ever above the very forces they try so hard to conquer. They missed the truth that every empire, every power, no matter how grand, is built on sand. And sand, when the wind blows, slips away. They thought they could outrun it, but the truth, no matter how they hid from it, would catch up. The problem with believing you're bigger than God is that you forget the power that holds the universe together. You forget that no matter how high you rise, the fall is always waiting. The bigger you think you are, the harder you fall. They might have thought they were invincible, that nothing could touch them. But they were walking a path lined with thorns, unaware that their own hubris was the sharpest of them all. They thought they were untouchable, but in reality, they were already crumbling. Their power was hollow, a fragile shell that could crack with the smallest of blows. The game they thought they controlled was slipping out of their grasp, slipping like water through their fingers. They never saw it coming. They never knew that their greatest enemy wasn't the people they crushed under their boots, but the very thing they failed to respect, the inevitable cycle of rise and fall that governs everything. They thought their name would echo forever, that their empire would stand for centuries, that their legacy would be written in gold letters across history. But they forgot the nature of time, the relentless passage of moments that never stop, that never care about the greatness of one individual or the failures of another. Time is indifferent. It doesn't remember the tyrants who thought they were gods. It doesn't remember the names of those who were convinced they were masters of the game. All those grandiose plans, all the strategies they devised to keep their empire afloat, all the manipulation, all the schemes, they were meaningless because they never accounted for one thing. Time waits for no one, and no one can escape the reckoning that it inevitably brings. The game they thought they were playing was nothing but an illusion, a fragile dream built on lies. They believed they were gods. They thought the world was theirs to control. And yet, every action, every move they made was a step towards their downfall. You see, when you think you can outsmart fate, when you think you can bend the world to your will, you lose sight of one thing. Fate is not a force that can be controlled by a single human. It is bigger than you. It is bigger than any one person, any empire, any fortune, any illusion of power. The more they tried to shape their destiny, the more they played their game, the more they cemented their own failure. Because fate isn't a thing to be controlled. It is a thing to be respected, to be understood. And they failed to understand it. They thought they could break it, but in the end, it broke them. They had everything. They had the wealth, the status, the control. They thought it made them untouchable, but the very thing they held most dear was the thing that would be their undoing. Power is an illusion. The moment you think you have it all is the moment it slips through your fingers, like sand in the wind. They thought they had the game figured out, but the game had already played them. They thought they were beyond consequences, beyond the reach of those they had wronged, beyond the very forces that govern all life. But they were not beyond anything. They were simply blind, and it is the blind who always fall hardest. They believed they could outlast everything. They believed they could stand tall while the world bowed to their will. But the universe is not a place of submission. It does not bend to the desires of men and women who think themselves above all else. It does not bow before the arrogant and the deluded. The arrogance they wore like a crown was their downfall. It was their poison. They didn't see it coming because they were too busy looking at the throne they had built for themselves, too busy looking at the power they had gathered around them. But the throne was empty. The power was fleeting. And when the final moment arrived, when the reckoning came, they realized too late that they had nothing. Not really. Nothing but the ruins of their own ambitions. They thought they were kings. They thought they were gods, invincible, unstoppable, untouchable. But they were just men and women, like the rest of us. The difference is that they fell too hard to ever rise again. Their arrogance was their greatest enemy, and in the end, it was their downfall. They could have seen it coming. They could have seen the cracks in the foundation if they weren't so blinded by their own ego. They could have saved themselves if they had learned the one lesson they failed to understand. Power is not permanent. Control is not absolute. And no one, no matter how high they rise, is beyond the reach of fate. The game they thought they controlled was never theirs to win. It was always bigger than them, always more complicated than they could ever understand. They might have had the pieces, but the game was always being played by someone else. The truth is, you cannot manipulate the world forever. You cannot bend the forces of nature to your will, no matter how much wealth or influence you hold. The world has a way of balancing itself out, a way of bringing everything back into alignment. And when the balance is tipped, when the scales of fate shift, you will fall. No one is invincible. No one is untouchable. And as much as they believed it, the truth was already written. The game would end and they would lose. They thought they had everything figured out. They thought their grip on the world was unbreakable. But the truth is, nothing lasts forever. The power they thought they had was always slipping away, always inching towards its inevitable end. They believed they were untouchable, but in the end they were nothing more than a fleeting moment in the grand scheme of things. And in that moment, when everything came crashing down, they would realize too late that the game was never theirs to control. It was always bigger than them. Always. That's the truth they refuse to acknowledge, isn't it? Always. No matter how much they thought they were above it all, no matter how many victories they stacked up, one after the other, there was always something larger than themselves, always something lurking in the shadows that they failed to account for. They had the riches, they had the power, they had the influence, but they never had control. Not real control. They were just players in a game they didn't fully understand. They built their empires on sand, thinking they could stand tall without realizing the inevitable erosion that time brings. They thought their money, their influence, their ability to control the minds of others would protect them forever, but it didn't. They were fools to believe they could escape the consequences of their actions. The universe doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care about the titles you hold or the riches you possess. It doesn't care about your arrogance. All it cares about is balance. And balance, like everything else, will always tip in the end. The higher you rise, the harder you fall. The greater the illusion of power, the greater the crash when it shatters. Their arrogance blinded them to the simplest of truths. No one can control everything. No one can bend the forces of the universe to their will. It doesn't matter how many people you manipulate, how many deals you broker, or how many threats you issue. The world is bigger than your desires, and it doesn't give a damn about your petty games. They thought they were the masters, but they were nothing more than pawns in a game much larger than they could ever comprehend. They were never in control. They were always being controlled, whether they knew it or not. They thought they could silence the whispers of doubt, erase the warnings from the world around them. They built walls around their minds, walls to keep the truth out, to shield themselves from the things they didn't want to see. But those walls don't last. No matter how high they are built, no matter how thick the stone, they will always crumble under the weight of reality. And when the walls fall, when the truth floods in, they are left with nothing but the wreckage of their own delusions. Everything they thought they controlled slips away like water through a cracked vessel. Everything they thought they were invincible against crashes down upon them in an overwhelming tide. They believed they could live above the rules that govern the world. They thought they could escape consequence, but consequences don't care about your position. They don't care about how much money you have or how many people you can manipulate. Consequences are inevitable. The truth is always waiting, just behind the veil, biding its time. The more they thought they could avoid it, the harder it came crashing down on them. It's only a matter of time. That's the lesson they never learned. Time waits for no one. And no matter how much they tried to manipulate it, to bend it to their desires, time was always the one thing they could never control. They were obsessed with power. They thought it was everything. But power is an illusion. It's temporary. It's fragile. It can be taken away in an instant, ripped from your grasp without warning. The more you try to cling to it, the more it slips away. It's a game, a dangerous game, where the stakes are high and the rewards are fleeting. They thought they had mastered it, thought they had beaten the system. But the truth is, the system never had a winner. It's not a game that can be won. It's a game that plays you. The moment you think you've won, the moment you think you're untouchable, that's when the fall comes. That's when you realize the game was never yours to control in the first place. They thought their empire would last forever. They thought the world they had built would never crumble, that the legacy they had forged would stand for eternity. But legacies are fragile too. They can be destroyed in an instant, torn apart by the very forces they failed to understand. History remembers those who earned their place, those who built their legacies with honor and respect. But those who built their empires on lies, manipulation, and greed, history forgets them. History buries them. The arrogance they wore like a crown was their greatest enemy. It led them to believe they were invincible. But they were not. They were mortal. And no one is exempt from the laws of the universe, not even them. They could have built something great. They could have used their power for good. They could have made a real difference in the world. But they chose to feed their own egos, to bow to their desires, to build their empire on the backs of others. And now, as the walls come crashing down around them, they realize too late that they were never the masters of anything. They were slaves to their own desires, and in the end, their desires led them straight into the arms of their own destruction. They were blinded by their own success. They believed their rise was inevitable, that nothing could stop them. But that's the problem with arrogance. It clouds your vision. It makes you think you're unstoppable when, in reality, you are just one moment away from your undoing. And when that moment comes, when the illusion shatters and the truth becomes undeniable, they will realize that they were never untouchable. They were just a part of the game, a brief flicker in the vast expanse of time. And their fleeting power, their fleeting success, will be forgotten just as quickly as it arrived. They could have been more. They could have been the ones to change the world, to leave a legacy that would be remembered for generations. But they chose to play the game the wrong way. They chose to believe they were above the rules, that they could escape the consequences of their actions. And now, as they stand in the ruins of what they once believed to be invincible, they will realize that it was all for nothing. Their empire, their power, their control, it was all a house of cards, ready to fall the moment the wind blew too hard. They thought they were bigger than God. They thought they could control everything, shape everything to their will. But the truth is, nothing can be controlled forever. Not people, not power, not time. And when everything they held dear comes crashing down, they will realize that they were never the masters. They were just players in a much larger game, a game they thought they understood, but a game that was always being played without them. Now, as the dust settles and the echoes of their arrogance fade into silence, the world moves on. The game continues, the power shifts, and those who thought they were untouchable, those who thought they could bend everything to their will be forgotten. Because the game was never about them. It was never about the individuals who thought they could control it all. The game is about something bigger, something far greater than they ever understood. And it always was. Always. It was never about the power they thought they controlled, nor the empire they thought they built. It was never about their name etched in the annals of history, never about the riches they acquired or the lives they manipulated. The true game, the one that always existed, is far grander than any of them could ever hope to comprehend. The real force, the real power that shapes everything around us, cannot be bent or tamed by the arrogant whims of a single soul, no matter how mighty they believe themselves to be. And yet, despite all the evidence, they continued to play the game as if the rules didn't apply to them. They were blinded by their own hubris, driven by the false belief that they could bend the world to their will. They thought they were invincible, invulnerable to the very forces that had shaped the world long before their birth and would continue long after their fall. But the world is not as simple as they believed. The game they played was not a game of mere accumulation. It wasn't about how much they could take or how many they could crush beneath their heels. It was never about winning or losing in the way they understood it. The truth of the game is this: it's about the balance of existence. It's about the flow of energy that courses through everything, the cycles of rise and fall, of creation and destruction, of light and dark. The game is one of life itself, and no one person, no matter how powerful, can ever seize control of it. They thought their wealth, their position, their influence meant that they were the ones pulling the strings. But in reality, the only string they ever controlled was the one tethered to their own arrogance, the one that kept them locked in the illusion that they could outrun the inevitable. The fall, when it comes, is never immediate. It never arrives with a loud crash or a sharp break. No, it's gradual. It's a slow unraveling that begins with small cracks, unseen, unnoticed, before the entire structure collapses under its own weight. They lived in a perpetual state of denial, constantly reinforcing the walls of their own delusion. They ignored the signs, the whispers of doubt that crept into their hearts. They dismissed the quiet, invisible forces that worked against them, the forces they couldn't control. Every wrong person, every broken promise, every lie they told, every soul they crushed, it all added up. It wasn't a matter of if they would fall, but when. And when that moment came, when the weight of their actions bore down on them with crushing force, they would realize the true extent of their failure. They didn't realize that their so-called control was nothing more than a temporary illusion. They thought they had the world in the palm of their hands, but the reality was much darker, much more insidious. The world doesn't revolve around any one person. The universe is indifferent to the desires of men and women, no matter how much wealth they amass or how much power they wield. And in their blindness, in their pursuit of dominance, they never understood this fundamental truth. They saw themselves as kings and queens, rulers of a world they thought they could manipulate at will. But the crown they wore was made of thorns, and the throne they sat upon was already crumbling, its foundation cracked, its support gone. What they didn't see, what they refused to acknowledge, was that the true strength in this world lies not in power, but in surrender. Not in domination, but in understanding. The game is not about controlling others, about shaping them to your will. It is about understanding your place in the larger scheme of things, about aligning yourself with the forces that govern existence, not defying them. It's about respect. Respect for the laws of nature, respect for the flow of time, respect for the balance that holds everything together. They tried to force their way to the top, to create an empire that they thought would stand the test of time. But they were blind to the fact that empires rise and fall. What stands today can be torn down tomorrow. And those who thought they were untouchable, who believed they had surpassed the forces that shape the universe, will always find themselves humbled in the end. Always. In their pursuit of greatness, they forgot that greatness is not defined by how much you take, by how many you conquer, or by how loud your name is spoken. True greatness is found in how you contribute to the world, how you leave a legacy that benefits others. They could have been more. They could have used their power, their wealth, their influence to create something that would have lasted. They could have built something meaningful, something that would have transcended their ego and their need for validation. But they chose instead to feed the beast of their own arrogance, to worship at the altar of their own desires. And in doing so, they condemned themselves to the fate they never saw coming. They will not be remembered for their power, for their conquests, or for the empires they built. They will be remembered for their hubris, for their blind belief that they were above everything, for their failure to understand that no one is ever truly in control. Their empire will crumble, their name will fade from memory, and the world will move on, indifferent to their rise and fall. That is the truth. It always has been, and it always will be. You see, they thought they could control the game. They thought they had mastered it. But the game is not about control. It's about understanding. It's about recognizing the forces that shape everything around you and learning to move with them, not against them. They tried to manipulate the system, to make it work for them, but the system cannot be bent to the will of a single person. It is bigger than that. It has always been bigger than that. The game is much larger than any one individual. It is a force beyond comprehension, one that moves in its own rhythm, indifferent to the whims of men and women. And in the end, when their name is forgotten, when their empire is reduced to dust, it will be the ones who understood this, the ones who didn't try to control everything, but instead learned how to flow with the tides of life who will remain. They will be the ones remembered, the ones whose legacies transcend time. It is not the ones who grasped for power, who clung to their wealth and influence, who made the world bend to their will. It is the ones who understood that true power lies in humility, in surrender, and in alignment with the forces that govern existence. They will be the ones who, though their names may not be shouted from the rooftops, will live on in the hearts and minds of those who learned from their wisdom. And when those who thought they were untouchable are long gone, when their names are whispered only in dark corners, the world will still be here. The game will still be playing. And the true players, the ones who understood the nature of the game, will still be in motion, still shaping the world in ways that no empire, no wealth, no illusion of control can ever touch. Always, always. The game will go on, and those who try to control it will be nothing more than a passing memory, a fleeting moment in the grand, infinite flow of time. Always. In the end, those who thought they were untouchable, those who believed they could control the game, will fade into obscurity. Their empire, their power, their illusions of invincibility will crumble, as they always do. The universe doesn't bend to human will. It moves on, indifferent to the arrogance of those who forget their place. True strength lies not in domination, but in understanding and humility. The game will continue, and those who align with its natural flow will be the ones remembered, long after the empire of the arrogant has fallen. Always.